Good morning. The mic is working? No, I... Oh. Just take this back. Perfect. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to add to the many topics we have heard yesterday, not only from the Czech Republic, also from other countries. And I will try to bring some other more international perspective into this, based on, you have heard my background based in the Netherlands and in Germany, but also with my work in Docomomo International. And just to start with, I decided to call this perception. We heard a lot yesterday about recording and how documentation is important. And by choosing the title of perception, I mean it is also not just about our experts' work, what we are doing, but it is also what are we achieving with our work? How is it perceived by other experts, by administrations, officials, but also by the public? And in that sense, I would like to give an overview on these topics and also refer slightly to the question on how digital technologies may support us in that. When it comes to modern heritage, and in particular post-war modernism, there are often a lot of prejudices we have to deal with, and it means there are too many of it. We heard about that yesterday, in particular the mass housing, which is very impressive, but there are many other public and other buildings. They are too big often, have another scale, they are too difficult to use, and they are often too poor in condition. I cannot tackle all of this, but I would like to approach at least these aspects in my talk. I guess most of you are aware, but nevertheless it is interesting to look into some statistics. Even that one is more than 10 years old, it is still relevant. It refers to the question of the pre-1960s and after 1960s to 90s, which is not completely the post-war modernism core, but it's a large part of it. And what we can see here, we see if I think the pointer is not working, but you can see it's the slide pastel reddish color, which indicates, and you can see that the amount of modern post-war modernism is indeed settled in the 60s to 90s, but of course the countries are not the same. We have really big differences in how big the amount is. You see the Estonian, the Baltic countries on the top left, which have a very high amount. We have other countries like the UK that apparently has still a larger part of building stock that is related to the pre-1960s, but that still includes the 50s. In any case, the post-war modernism is a large majority of our building stock, and if we look into some other statistics, so this is familiar. We heard about 2.5% of the area of the Czech Republic that is protected, that are protected monuments. This is slightly different in the countries, but normally I think it never exceeds 4%. I heard Italy should have a bit more, but in average it is like 1 or 2 or 3% of the monuments in the country that might be protected. And even if we look at that, the share of post-war modernism is much less. Again, here another statistic, but I think this more or less shows that the building stock after 1945, so post-war building stock, is up to 77 or even 80% in some countries. And even though only little of this post-war modern building stock is protected, what we see as an organization as Docomomo, but also as academics and practitioners, that many of those buildings have a heritage significance. And I would also like to refer to the book of Anatol Stoys, my predecessor as chair of Docomomo International, a book that was just published this summer, Modern Heritage, in which the Docomomo Rehabilitation Awards are documented. So there are 12 or 13 international cases of good rehabilitation, good conservation projects related to modern heritage. What I rather would like to focus on is the work of assessing heritage places. What they did is they categorized typologies of modern heritage. I think in the end it's 10 categories. I just put like 6 photos here as an example, but what is very evident is that the type of buildings is very much related to the post-war society of individual mobility. So we have a lot of infrastructure works. We have a lot of administrative buildings, high-rise buildings as new categories, but also something like tourism. So we have new typologies. And I would like to use this kind of categorization to have a look into some of the German issues and themes that we are dealing with. I will be jumping between 2 of the German states, North Rhine-Westphalia in the west, you know, a very big state with the highest share of population, and Berlin. So they are different because some is in North Rhine-Westphalia is an area state and Berlin is a city state. I think this is a crucial point when it comes to these questions. So a big issue in North Rhine-Westphalia, but in other parts, is post-war modern churches. Already in after 2000, they started to analyze the building stock and to inventorize it. I think only in North Rhine-Westphalia there are more than 2,500 post-war modern churches, and many of them are empty. So there are different projects. First of all, the inventory, so to see what kind of buildings do we have, what are the challenges, what are the typologies, and the Ministry of Building in North Rhine-Westphalia already started a few years ago what is called a model project. So they tried to find new purposes and also to discuss conservation strategies. This statistic shows very interestingly how after the World War II the amount of new churches was built here in the part of in the Eastern Westphalia. So these alone are more than 1,400. And what was one of the conclusions here, and I put a very famous example of Gottfried Böhm's church in Neviges, a complete concrete, brutalist concrete church, that people say, well, they understand that a church, due to its function and historic story, needs to be preserved and has heritage values. But when it comes to modern, post-war modern buildings, of course, the materiality often is an issue. So the appreciation of concrete, in particular of exposed concrete, is seen as a kind of difficult aspect, in particular in the public. Well, there are other examples, and now we jump to Berlin, where you can see how wonderfully these kind of also concrete churches can be preserved. St. Agnes is now the famous place of Galerie König, a very famous art gallerist in Germany. And I think it's a very beautiful example. It got a lot of prizes. It's originally from Werner Düttmann, a very famous post-war architect in Berlin. But of course, I think this is very difficult to transfer to other places. Berlin is the capital. Berlin has a highly multi-cultural population, and that is very interested in arts. And so there is a crucial dimension of people that appreciate and that allow for such a development. But what to do in smaller places and smaller cities where we don't have these crucial. So it's not so easy to transfer examples. Again, it's a single case solution, but we can find very interesting solutions here. Another thing, the famous ICC, the Congress Center of Berlin, has just been protected in 21, so last year, as a monument listed in Berlin. And here you see it's gigantic. It reminds to the very famous competition of the 1930s in Kharkiv, where a multi-purpose theater was planned that was never built. So I think this is really a very interesting case. But still, we are waiting. There is a whole procedure to develop a new purpose for it. There was a rumor that maybe Elon Musk wants to hire this building as the new headquarters of his company. We don't know. We see what happens with Twitter now. I doubt he will come to Berlin. But anyway, so this is still under discussion, what to do with it, but it is protected. Another thing, jumping back to North Rhine-Westphalia, they are very active in the area of Düsseldorf-Cologne, so the western part of North Rhine-Westphalia, to make new inventories of post-war modern heritage. And many of it is related to infrastructure. So those bridges in Düsseldorf and Cologne were just protected. There is the metro stations, there are TV towers and many more. So they have a whole categorization that they are now putting forward for protection. But we also see a nice example on the left side. That's a bridge in Cologne that has actually is protected but has been extended. So it was doubled, as you can see, from the original size of 2 lanes. And again, jumping back to Berlin, again, famous brutalist buildings. The left one has just been protected this year, and the right one, so-called mice bunker, so it's a testing facility for research with animals. This building is now on a list, and the same like for the ICC, they are developing new strategies on how to conserve these buildings. And I think another big issue really for the communities, the cities, are the public buildings. I just choose 2 examples here, back to North Rhine-Westphalia. So the Stadthaus, so the city house of Rheinsberg, built by Gottfried Böhm also, now already in the 1980s. So we have heritage that dates back to the 1980s that is protected. And what I find very crucial is the university campuses. Here the famous one of the Ruhr University in Bochum, which was the first campus university in Germany and is one of the biggest campuses. And here we can see that at the moment a lot of buildings are destroyed, although parts of the campuses is protected due to contaminants and other things. So it is also very crucial how we look at these buildings when we want to conserve them. I think there are good examples, just one from the Netherlands. The universities in the Netherlands, of course, it's a bit easier because the universities own their buildings. This is much more complicated in Germany, where we have the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education, and we have many stakeholders. So here the universities own the campuses, and I think we can see of how they develop from car parks into green parks. Many they really transformed their universities, often with the existing buildings and also with new extensions. I don't go into the detail. Of course, if we look at the buildings, there are different strategies how to conserve it. But nevertheless, I think that universities in particular should serve as role models on how to deal with modern heritage. And now coming back to the point of too many, too big, too difficult to use, and too poor in condition. I think we really have to deal with certain aspects. I already mentioned that there is not one solution that fits all. I think there is a big difference of what can we do in bigger cities in terms of developing a new use compared to the rural areas or the territorial states that have, for example, a lot of churches with less population related to it. So this is crucial for the question of how to develop reuse concepts. Again, the documentation is crucial because only when the buildings are documented, we can really understand what is to do and to come up with serious concepts. And what we see is that often, next to the perception, the question of contaminants plays a crucial role in the development of concepts. But there are other things to do on the legislation and also on the education level. So it is very often the facilitation or the improvement of competing guidelines that we always identify as one aspect. Now, I will not so much speak about the legislation, but rather about the education, because that's my profession. And I find it very interesting that the German BDA, this is the Association of German Architects, not the chamber, but that they really took a quite clear position in how architects should deal with existing buildings. Not just modern heritage, but we see how relevant modern heritage is, just related to its amount, but they really say we have to develop a culture of care and repair. So we should not build new buildings. And this is as I said, the order of architects, selected architects. They make whole programs like their yearly debates that deal about preserving the existing. That's very interesting because often it is perceived as a conflict. Architects don't like heritage preservation because they want to design new buildings. So, but if this, or they say we have to better understand our built environment, so we have to think in typologies. And if this is meant serious, it means, or what would it mean for the architectural education and for the architectural practice? I want to highlight for sure examples that you know, but which I think are still very helpful, like giving a Pritzker Prize to, for example, Lacaton Vassal, who were very famous in preserving modern buildings or heritage in general, but in particular housing. We heard yesterday in Miles, or in the discussions after Miles' presentation, how difficult housing in particular is, because it's at the very center of the people itself. They are living in it. Yeah, they are differently attached to it. And that is why I really think that for housing, other strategies are needed than maybe for other buildings in how we approach conservation, and we have good examples. Also, one of the prizes from the Docomomo Rehabilitation Award is dealing with a big housing site in Geneva. That was a long-term project, but that has successfully been done, and it's in the category of engaged society. So we have to engage with society and with the users. Just bringing up now another example of housing, just 2 weeks ago, this city of Berlin has made a new proposal for the World Heritage Tentative List to list 2 post-war modern heritage sites in Berlin, in the former West and in the former East. You probably know that the modern settlements of the 1920s were one of the first housing sites that were listed in the World Heritage List as an ensemble of housing. So they want to continue in that sense and propose the Le Corbusier Unité d'Habitation on the left side, together with the Congress Hall, the Hansaviertel, and the former East Berlin Interbaus of the 1960s, the former Stalin, then Karl Marx Allee, now Frankfurter Allee, to protect. And what is interesting is they did a very, I think, thorough investigation on how these sites could be compared to other World Heritage sites. But on the right-hand side, I just took a copy from the comments that were made by inhabitants and the public. And you can't read it, but they stopped the list after a morning because there were so many comments from inhabitants that were rather critical on this. And there we see that housing really needs another kind of attention in our communication. So the Faro Convention is something that is, of course, implementing that as a step in the heritage conservation, so the participation aspect, the relationship with communities, and this kind of Denkmal Europa is a new app of the German heritage preservation officials, where they try to teach heritage to young people, to children, and so on. So I think it's a good start. We do the same in our education. It's a course I'm teaching in Germany, where I ask our international students, our German students, to tell us of how they are affected by modern heritage. And so they also engage with digital technologies, and they define often heritage from their countries and interpret it. So here it was about infrastructure. A department store in Kosovo, in Pristina, a theater in Algiers, and why this is important, in particular the cultural and social aspect of this heritage. And in the design studios, in our section Heritage and Architecture, we also approach modern heritage. All our studios are dealing with post-war heritage, and I think what is crucial is that the analysis of the buildings, of the sites, is part of it. So we don't give a specific program, but the students develop the program, the reuse of those buildings themselves within the analysis. And what is important for us is that they define intervention strategies. So here it says, are there parts that should be demolished? Or is there a high-intensity transformation, or is there a low-intensity transformation? So these arguments are based on an evidence-based analysis of the sites. And of course, we have technical aspects. Reglazing Modernism is one of my books, where we particularly looked at facades. And here, iconic buildings from the US and from Europe, the Villa Tugendhat is among them, on how they could be approached related to glazing, window and facade systems in a technical sense. Again, it's about intervention strategies. And as Docomomo, we came up with the manifesto on education. I don't want to read that, but we see the need to intervene or to improve parts of our architectural education. And one proposal is, for example, point number 2, to document effective educational project on conservation and maintain open access. This was a proposal from our practitioners from preservation authorities who said, I'm working in a ministry and we don't have the men or women power to really get a grasp of all these buildings that are there. So we should more collaborate with institutions. We should document all projects done in education to learn from it, to get background. So there are ways where we can collaborate. And just a very short look to the global perspective. You know that World Heritage is very underrepresented, in particular Africa and some other countries, although those are the regions that have the highest development pressure. And what I want to express is that this is also a core of our work in Docomomo, so that we talk about this term of multiple modernities. So we cannot copy-paste solutions easily. I think even not within Europe, but for sure not around the globe. But we have to understand what is the particular value of different sites So we currently run a project with Africa. We selected 9 fellows that are learning to document by learning photography, writing, and desktop publishing in 4 different countries. We have a series, it started last week, a series of exhibitions and publications like a Docomomo journal planned, where we want to create a better perception of modern heritage in societies. And next to the 18 working parties that we have currently in Docomomo, there is one aspect that I find very interesting, that we have a very strong movement at the moment in the Middle East. We had a new chapter of Saudi Arabia last year, Tunisia joined this year, and we also know that the Emirates are really establishing modern heritage working groups in the ministries to come up and protect their modern urban heritage. And I think this is the last slide, and I just would like to say that as universities, the famous EVI building at TU Delft, we can learn from heritage for the existing building stocks, and we can also learn and live in post-war modern heritage. Thank you very much.